This video was made possible by you. If you want to save time and support what I do, check the link in the description that will take you to my store where you can purchase the source file for what we're creating in this video, as well as other tutorials on my channel. Thank you for your support, and let's get back to the video. In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can make this CTA section responsive. So if you recall from the previous episodes of this series, we're using this section basically everywhere on the site. And it's a very important element to have on your website because that's the whole point of the entire website, the call to action. In our case, since we're making a website for a fictional app, downloading the app is the main thing which we're trying to nudge the users towards in this call to action. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to think about how this section is going to behave across all the resolutions, because it's not a very simple layout, right? We're going to have to think about how exactly are these elements going to stack below, beneath, next to each other, and so on. So we're going to have to think about how that's going to happen, and then we can start building the structure. So this is going to be a third iteration, the third version of this call to action section. And hopefully we're going to create a layout that is easy to resize, similar to this one, right? And speaking of this layout, by the way, which we responsified in the previous episode of this series, I found out that we actually have to do one small adjustment. And that's with these text containers. Currently, the minimum width is set to 300. So let me just quickly change this to be 200, which should be the same width as the image. So that this object is going to have 200 as well. Just a very quick update before we get back to the CTA adjustments. So let's do 200, 200, 200, and 200 here as well. Okay. The reason why we're doing that is on smaller sizes, for example, about right here, this object, you can see it happening right now, right? This object would extend beyond the layout, right? We can't have that. It's happening now because this is way too narrow of a layout. So we don't optimize for 186 pixel screens, but this started happening somewhere around here, which is about 300, and that's size that you probably want to optimize for. So that's why we did this adjustment. Okay, and now we can get back to our CTA section, and I can remove this note that I made about adjusting this element. All right, so let's do it. Let's think about it. I'm going to select the second variant, option, and then click and drag to create an instance. And I will detach this instance because we want to move things around freely, right? So if I were to duplicate this and then let's say make it narrow, like this is probably most likely where the smallest mobile resolution is going to be, somewhere around here. Yeah. Let me extend this. And obviously this is not how it should go, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the direction of this. Now I think we're getting somewhere. I'm going to select the second background image container, or actually the image that's inside of that, and move it probably somewhere around here. I don't know yet. Maybe we are going to keep it here so that the text is actually visible. But in any case, I think the phone frame should either, let me duplicate this again, should either go all the way down so that we have a natural edge here, and we can actually make this actually makes sense, right, visually, because something similar we have here. Let me remove the auto spacing. So this is definitely one option, right? This is definitely one option. I probably need to change the colors just to make it visible, and alignment as well. So this is one option. We could get this basically, yeah. Or then the other option would be something like this, right? You would get a maybe a line here or something, or maybe this section would be a different color. I don't know yet, But looking at this, to me personally, this makes the most sense. Now, the problem is, are we actually going to be able to make this work? But let's see, let's try. Let me just keep this, what we have here, as the backup, and I'm going to duplicate this. Now, we are using one of those image containers as a shadow for this section. We're basically taking the whole image and blurring it. Now, I'm not sure if we want to keep this in this new version, so I'm going to just remove it for now. All right, now, and let's think about what needs to happen if we want to keep this image at the bottom center of this layout. So just to remind you, we do have a phone frame, and there is the screen contents component placed inside that is then skewed and moved like this, essentially. So if I were to center this image within the phone frame parent element, and then I maybe shrunk this a little bit, let's say, let's go for the 300. Or actually, this needs to be probably more, because as you can see, we have the shadow, and if we make it too small, the shadow begins to get cut off. We do have a shadow originating from the phone. We could always, from the phone screen, we could always turn off the shadow, definitely an option, but let's try keeping it. I think it adds like some kind of depth, which I like. So let's keep it for now. But here's the thing. Let's see what happens if we select this phone frame and go to this constraints menu and go center and then bottom. What's going to happen is essentially it's going to get glued to the center horizontally and vertically towards the bottom. Okay, so I think we're getting there, right? Because we do want the phone to be somewhere around here, although the position of this is not right. Okay, I think we're gonna have to move this phone more to the left, maybe even the phone container frame more to the left, and it creates a problem, of course, because now it overlaps with this section. So we're gonna have to think about whether we wanna make this trade-off. But overall, if you take a look at this looks pretty nice, doesn't it? The phone stays in the center. However, it does overlap with the text, but I think in my view, if you imagine like this being responsive, when the layout switches to mobile, the phone still stays at the bottom. So I think that's pretty nice. And I think I'm gonna probably keep it in this position. That means that yes, probably we're gonna have to shrink this, but it's not so bad because we could make this like smaller font, let's say 36 instead of 38. And even then, actually, as you can see, I totally forgot about the fact that the original layout was basically like this, right? This was the original layout. I think we could just switch the original layout to whatever this is, right? And then just make it a bit smaller like that. I think this could work, right? So we're going to be getting something like this. Of course, ignore all these elements switching around. We're going to have to fix that. But we can even make this a bit larger, like 40. I think that's pretty good. I think that is pretty good. Now, with the download call to action, since the mobile layout will be aligned to the left, I think we're going to have to make this align to the left as well, right? And then hack contents. Because I don't think there's a way to enforce a change of auto layout direction based on element size. So that's why. But nevertheless, I don't think this is bad at all. I think that right now we just have to think about how we rearrange these. Now, this is basically, you can ignore this when thinking about the auto layout, right? Because the auto layout basically contains just these two elements. We can remove whatever this is, it's hidden. It contains just these two, and this one is outside of auto layout because it has the ignore auto layout feature enabled. Now, I think this should be fill container as well. However, this is going to have a maximum width of 320, right? This is going to be hug, definitely. But now let's see what happens if I shrink this. Okay, so we do get some switching to the mobile layout, but it's way too late. I think we need to set up a minimum width for this element. And now let me refer to our, let's say, pages test file, because after all, we're optimizing this to be published on Figma pages because we want to optimize this to be used for the web. We want to make this responsive. Let me just sketch these down. Let me do 800. Let me do 1279. More like 799 this one, and 1279 on this one, and then let's do 1600 or something like that. I'm just gonna copy these so that I can see the breakpoints, right? That's gonna be desktop, tablet, and mobile. Those are the breakpoints. So this is a desktop. So theoretically speaking, we should switch to the mobile version at about this size, but we're probably gonna have to do that sooner or somehow deal with this, right? Deal with this overlap of elements. I think we need something in between these two elements that is going to push this, that's going to make this, it's going to shrink this element, right? It's going to shrink this element when we reached about this size, about this one. Not even this, but just here, right? It's starting to overlap. What I think we could do is create a rectangle that is going to be, let's just make it ridiculously visible for now. It's going to be like 0.1 pixels, right? And we could take this Command X and then paste it here, Command V, and rearrange this so it's in between these two elements. And this element would be fill container, yeah, but it would have a minimum width of 369, okay? So theoretically, this should start pressing on this element, right? As you can see, it's happening right now. And it start a transformation. It could start a transformation that would then switch over to mobile. So this is pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with how this is behaving so far. However, I'm a little bit concerned about how this is going to behave when it's fully in mobile. But for now, let's just try and turn the vertical spacing on this, since this whole thing is a wrap auto layout. Let's turn it to, I don't know, 96 for now, so that we don't get this ridiculous spacing. I think even less. Let's do 32. All right, and here you start seeing the actual final outcome, the desirable outcome that is, which is nice. Actually, let me make this a bit visible. So let's do 4 pixels so you can see that it's actually there, right? So this is pushing, but it stops pushing here. And the reason why it stops pushing here is because these elements have reached their minimum width, right? The text objects have reached their minimum width. That's 225. And we're still pushing the headline and description container. And in order to switch this to mobile, I think we should set a minimum width to this object as well. And it's not going to be whatever this is going to be. Actually, it could be something around this size. Let's take a look at what it is. Let's do 100 and 192. Right? Minimum width, 192. And this should theoretically switch the layout over to mobile right about now. Okay? So it did, but at the same time, you can see there is a mess. There's a whole mess with this happening. So it's jumping all over the place. It's jumping all over the place. This is not ideal, right? This is not ideal. But since I cannot think of any workaround right now, why don't we focus on one additional problem that I see, which is the fact that we're gonna somehow need to create some extra space below the download button, right? Like this, in order to make space for this visual. The first thing I think needs to happen is let's select this section, this rectangle and this section again and create another auto layout from that, right? Which is just basically going to create an additional level, but we need this extra level to turn this into a vertical layout like this, right? This whole thing. But at the same time, we want to keep this. So let's do wrap auto layout on this inner content. And let's just call this content actually, right? So that the functionality is still the same, right? But at the same time, we have to do the following. We have to put something beneath this auto layout. Let's create that actually. Let's do 2 rectangles like this, Shift A, and then let's rename this to bottom padding adjuster. And I am going to do Command X, select this, and Command V. What I'm going to do next is do fill container on this, press enter, and do fill container on these 2 rectangles as well. And I'm going to do 0 on the horizontal spacing, but I'm going to do wrap auto layout. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that about this size, or about this size, I don't know, somewhere around here, these are going to flip, and the vertical spacing is going to be, the vertical gap between rows is going to be like 100. Yeah. But for that, we need the minimum width on these rectangles. So let me select these rectangles directly. Let me also do magenta on these so we can see what we're working with. And then let's do 300 minimum width on these, 300. So now watch what's going to happen, right? We get some extra space. Obviously you can see these, but if we were to set this opacity to 0, you can't see it, right? But you still get some extra space, which is nice. So let me just turn the spacing back to 100. And I think we're going to need more. We're going to need like 250 in terms of the spacing. So something like this. Oh, that's a bit too much. I think we want to go for this, maybe 180. Yeah. When this happens, right, when we reach a certain size, the responsiveness is going to change. So just to recap what we did in the last few steps, because I experimented on the site a little bit. So let's just recap what I did. We have this content auto layout, which contains this, and this rectangle serves as something that pushes this section, shrinking it, making space for this image. So I think there should be some kind of there's a fill container, right? There's fill container. And then there's this section, bottom padding adjuster, that is going to basically create extra bottom padding whenever we reach below a certain size. And if you put it all together, you get this. So what remains to be done now? I think that we need some horizontal spacing on these ones, right? On this content auto layout. Let me go for 24, right? Let's see what's going to happen. Okay, so it's pretty good. So while this rectangle is pushing this section to be more narrow with the minimum width of this text in mind, there's also the spacing, the horizontal spacing to take into consideration. And when the rectangle reaches 0, or like it's being completely squished, then the elements are going to get rearranged like that. And I think this is pretty good, actually. So now let me just rename this to, let's just say what it does. Let's just say this element shrinks the left-hand side text, right? It just shrinks the text. That's its function. But at the same time, as you can see, we got even spacing from all the sides except for this bottom one. So why don't we, first of all, remove this spacing, right? Remove that's gonna be the vertical gap between objects on this whole layout. And since this is 3 pixels tall, let me make this 1 on both of these. Let's do 1 pixel, right? And 1 on this one as well, right? We're now 45 from the bottom, but we want to be 44. So why don't I just do 43 on the bottom one to compensate for this line? Now the lines are very thin, so you almost cannot see them, but let's just do a final check if this is really what we need. Now, I think we could actually shrink this spacing. I think we could go for 34 and 33 on this one. I think we could make it a bit more compact. Let's make it a bit more compact like this, right? That's one thing. Another thing, I think this needs a little bit of a bigger minimum width. I think we could go for 220. Let's see what's that gonna look like. Because of this, right? Because of this behavior that's happening here. I think we need actually not bigger, but smaller. So let's go for 170 minimum width. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I think this fixed the problem, right? So no more line being put here. So yeah, it's a pretty good responsive behavior, although I think we need more vertical spacing on this one. So let's just increase that to 220, 230. I think this looks pretty nice now. Then I think we could actually add some right padding on this section. Let's do 24 on the right. And let's see if it's gonna improve, because the overlap here, I'm concerned about that. So I think we could do even more, maybe 48. Why don't we do 48? Does that have any effect? Actually, no, I think actually it doesn't, right? No, it doesn't have any effect. I'm just concerned about these two elements coming too close together. But what about increasing this spacing? What about increasing it to 40 and keeping this one at 32 or 24? What do we think about that? Is it better? Yeah, I think that's better. I think that is better. Okay, and now let's just hide these helper elements. So let me select this and this, and let me add a helper at the beginning of the name. Let me add like helper, right? Why don't we lock these? Is this gonna work still? Yeah, let's keep them locked. And let's make these elements invisible. And if we take a look at the behavior right now without the helper elements, this is the outcome, right? And I think this is pretty good. Actually, I think this is pretty good because, I think this is pretty good because you can see that the text starts to shrink when the display comes too close, when the screen comes too close. At the same time, when the overlap starts to happen here, it switches over. And then we get this basically. Now there's some wonky stuff happening at around 275 in terms of the screen width, 275. But I don't think we're optimizing for that small of a resolution. I think we're optimizing at most for 220, which is the 2014 iPhone SE, if I'm not mistaken. And even this is very narrow by today's standards. I think we're mostly want to see 370, 360, but definitely nothing below 300. Okay, so this is pretty awesome. Why don't I change the color of this rating to white so you can see it against the background? And yeah, it could be always improved, but since we're working with limited functionality, I think this is pretty nice. And I think we could adjust the background image container. I think this could be just not left and right, but just left and then center. This is because of the color, right? So we played around with the colors so that it fits the image, but if we move the image, then that no longer works, right? Now I think we could move this phone frame to the background so it's actually behind the button and so on, right? So it's behind the button, which could potentially allow us to make this screen a bit larger. Let me try and make this a bit larger like this. Let's see, resize. And also we could move it to the left more, maybe actually shrink it again like this. Maybe rotate it a little bit, just a tiny bit. And yeah. Now, in practical terms, this is not going to be used in the designs. Yes, it's still going to be, when you set your screen to this width, you're still going to get this kind of a layout. But realistically, if I were to take this, let me just copy this to the test file. Let me just copy this to the test file, right? That's Figma pages. And let me make this 1152. And then this is going to be like, what, 24 from each side. So let's do the full width, -48. And let's do, again, you're going to basically just see these three, right? Let me align this. And I think on mobile, we could actually disable the shadow because it looks really weird, right? And now let's launch the prototype. Let's see what that looks like in Figma pages. So if I resize this, you can see that we get a nice responsive behavior. Now there are some bugs with the screen rounding, but we can troubleshoot this by, for example, replacing this whole thing with an image. But if you check the basic 3 resolutions that Figma offers, I think this is pretty nice. And as you can see in the upcoming episodes, we might take a look at whatever's happening here. This is a weird behavior. We might have to fix that. But I think I'm just going to take this. Delete all of this. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn this into a component and do CTA section _ responsive, so that we know that we now have a responsive variant that we can use if we want to. All right. This has been a complicated one, very complex, a lot of workarounds, but I think this is worth it, especially now with Figma pages. It's really worth making your components fully responsive. And it's even worth to do so many little tweaks to get this right, so that your CTA looks right on all the resolutions. Your sections look right on all the resolutions. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.